Mr. Terrific is the 24th episode of the 3rd season of The Golden Girls. This is directed by Terry Hughes, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. I did like the episode. I don't like Mr. Terrific. There's just something about him that I really didn't care for. Great performance, but not a fan of the character. It starts off establishing a couple of narratives. Dorothy is looking for a job. Blanche needs a new bed. And then Rose comes in and says that she's met Mr. Terrific, who is actually a children's entertainer who dresses up as a superhero, and she actually has a date with him. She's getting ready to go on her date, and Blanche's bed has been delivered, and they delivered the wrong bed. And I'll talk about this part of the narrative very briefly here, because I don't have too many thoughts. Blanche doesn't know what to do, because they delivered the wrong bed. The bed they delivered she loves, but it's way more expensive than the bed she wanted or the bed she bought. But they only charged her the lower price of the bed she purchased. So now she has the moral dilemma of, does she keep the bed and not say anything, or does she tell them? And honestly, I think they handled this quite well. We'll come back to that at the very, very end. We spent some time watching the TV show being recorded, which I thought was really good fun. Mr. Terrific's costume is horrendous, but in a very fun and eye-catching way. Rose is visiting Dorothy there, actually, because Dorothy has got a consulting position on the show because of her background in education, which I thought was really great. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that, a little bit more of Dorothy at work and hearing her opinions on things. I think that would have been a little bit more interesting, but either way, I'm glad that she had a role there. And Rose is also, of course, there to see Mr. Terrific, and after the show's recorded, he demanded that she wore the button. He gave her a button, a badge, and just the way he told her that she wasn't wearing it and she should be wearing it, there was just something about his tone there that I really didn't like. And the next thing we know, Mr. Terrific comes over to visit Rose back at the house, and they've fired him. And the reason they fired him is because Dorothy, and initially it sounded like Dorothy suggested letting him go or doing something drastically different with his character, but that's not actually true. Dorothy just came up with a bunch of suggestions, such as changing the theme song, and Mr. Terrific was not happy. He didn't want these changes, so they basically said, accept the changes or you're fired. And he lost his job. So it's not Dorothy's fault. He leaves, the replacement doesn't work out, Dorothy is down at the studio, and the next thing we know, Dorothy is on television. We find this out because Rose goes to see Mr. Terrific, who's at this bar, and I love the fact that they all knew who he was. He was clearly a regular there, which I quite liked. And they look on the television, and it's Dorothy. And it's clear that she didn't necessarily want to do this, but she didn't really have a choice. And this was the last straw for Mr. Terrific. So he has a plan. And I'll be honest, I didn't know what his plan was. I didn't realise what he was doing. So that part of it was well written. But I didn't love this final scene. He goes to the studio and he ends up going onto this ledge, this window ledge. And he's not going to jump. He's going to fly. And I genuinely thought that he was having some kind of nervous breakdown, and he did genuinely believe he could fly. He'd been Mr. Terrific for so long that maybe he started to believe these things, but that's not where they went with it. I'm not saying not my idea, but what I thought would have been more interesting. I definitely think it would have been more interesting, but it was actually a publicity stunt, and he jumped. And I will say that moment when he jumped was quite dramatic for several reasons. One, I didn't expect him to do it. Two, Rose was in his arms at the time. But actually, he'd hooked himself up to a wire, so he was just swinging back and forth. And it looked great. They'd put some breeze there. Rose's skirt was billowing in the breeze, and it did look good. But I don't like the fact that he decided to jump. Granted, knowing he was wired up, but Rose wasn't. Rose was just in his arms. Maybe when he jumped, Rose could have easily jolted and fallen out of his arms, and I think it was very ridiculous and irresponsible and careless and stupid and selfish, and I don't like it. I don't like the character. I do not like Mr. Terrific as a person. His attitude is not great. His personality is very annoying. I don't like him. And I didn't like that final scene. It was unpredictable. It was dramatic, but I didn't care for it. And then the final scene is actually Blanche panicking that at some point somebody's going to come and arrest her for stealing the bed, ostensibly, and then there's a knock at the door, and it looks like it's a police officer. It's actually the person who plays the police officer in The Mailman on the Mr. Terrific TV show. And Blanche, without giving anybody a chance to explain, thinks that it's the police officer there for her. So not a bad ending, not a bad final scene. There are some good bits in this episode, but in general, I didn't love it because I don't love the character of Mr. Terrific. I think they could have done a little bit more with Dorothy's involvement here. In general, it's an okay episode, but Mr. Terrific definitely isn't my all-time favourite.